So I skipped showing you this part because it wasn't very exciting. Essentially what I did was take a cup of King Arthur whole wheat flour and mix it with a half a cup of water from our filter on our tap. And now we're going to cover it loosely and let it sit. It's day 2. We definitely have some bubbling going on, which is really cool. My house is kind of cold right now because it's snowing outside. So I'm keeping my sourdough starter in my oven with the light on. That keeps enough heat to allow it to do the fermentation process. So this is day 2. It's the second full day. We started the sourdough on Saturday, fed it on Sunday, and we are feeding it today on Monday. So it's Tuesday of my first week with sourdough that I started on Saturday, and this is the day after my first day of multiple feedings. It's getting really active, which I think is a really good thing.
So last year, along with a rather substantial amount of Americans, I kind of got into the sourdough making bug, or rather I was bitten by it. And I started two different starters, Theodoughsia and Dorothea. And they were going along swimmingly, and then I had to go back to school. And I started neglecting my sourdough babies. So recently I've decided to start round number 2 with Theodoughsia Brrr, since she's being born in a cold time of year. And I like puns. Anyway, history nerd 2. It's a history pun. It's the best kind of pun. So, one of the things that has always bothered me about the sourdough starting process, really, it's not the sourdough making process, the sourdough starting process. One of the things that's really bothered me is it feels very wasteful. You end up throwing away a lot of discard. It just, while you're waiting for your sourdough to get strong enough to rise a loaf of bread. So when I was working with Theodoughsia and Dorothea last year, came up with a series of sourdough starter discard recipes. And one of them I'm going to share with you today is my sourdough starter biscuits. We're going to start with a cup of all-purpose flour. And to this, we're going to add 1 stick of cubed butter. I really went a little overboard on the cubing because it makes it easier when you're trying to cut your butter into your flour. And now we look for the pastry knife, the ever elusive pastry knife. You're just gonna cut this into the butter. You're gonna cut the flour and the butter together so that it becomes crumbly. If I was not demonstrating this for you guys, I would totally cheat and use my food processor, because the food processor, you know, I do love my kitchen gadgets. I do try to find a way to do things without the kitchen gadgets so that anybody who doesn't have the kitchen gadgets can do them. But at the same time, if you can get yourself a good food processor, it makes pastry making so much easier. It makes pie dough so much easier. And you can find them at Goodwill. People like get rid of them, or like yard sales. You always have the person that got it for Christmas is like, what am I gonna do with this this food processor. You can find bread makers at yard sales as well, because people get them for Christmas and are like, what am I gonna do with this? Or they'll make like 3 loaves of bread and it'll go in a closet somewhere and they'll decide they don't want it anymore. Or they'll forget they have it, and then when they're getting ready for the yard sale, they'll get rid of it. Seriously, yard sales are a great place to find used kitchen items. So are estate sales. I once found an entire set of vintage Pyrex bowls at an estate sale for like 1/3 of what they would have cost me on eBay. But that's another story. You want to get it nice and crumbly, because the little bursts of butter help give it its flakiness, or so I've been told. If you see any cats run by randomly, it's because it's snowing here and everyone has the zoomies. I'm gonna go ahead and add my tablespoon of baking powder. Probably should have done that first. I think this will turn out. It's pretty crumbly, it's pretty dry. It should incorporate nicely. And we'll add my 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And then to this mixture, ideally, what you'd want to do is mix the baking powder in with the flour and then add in the butter. I made a mistake. We'll see how this goes. And now we're going to add a cup of discarded starter. It's going to act as our liquid. Kind of like milk or whatnot would. Or buttermilk. We're making buttermilk biscuits. This is gonna create something very similar to a buttermilk biscuit because of the tanginess of the sourdough. It kind of creates something very similar. But you're gonna get what is known in baking parlance as a very shaggy dough. In fact, at some point, you may discover that your dough whisk or whatever you're using to stir it up is not sufficient to the task of creating this very shaggy dough, in which case you're going to resort to using the mixing apparatus at the end of your hand, at the end of your arm. We're not quite there yet, I don't think. A shaggy dough is a dough that doesn't it seems very dry, it does not want to hold together, but it's kind of, it reminds me of hair of a dog, shaggy dog falling off of your whisk. And I'm gonna go ahead and get this off of my whisk with my freshly washed hand. And we are going to turn this out onto a floured surface and kind of swoosh it about. Smoosh. Smooshing your dough. That is a very technical term. Now you're going to want to turn. You're going to want to flour your surface. And then you're going to want to turn your dough out onto your floured surface. You can literally smoosh this out with your hands. You don't need a rolling pin. I like a rolling pin, but you can just swoosh it. Till it's about 1 inch thick. And then you're going to use your biscuit cutter. Again, you don't need a biscuit cutter. You can cut this into squares. You can use a jar lid. I just happen to have a whole set of biscuit cutters that I use to make biscuits with. Yes. Like I said, the cats have got the zoomies tonight. I'm not exactly sure why. It's been kind of crazy town up in here. I'm gonna end up with 6 biscuits. But then I'm gonna roll this back up into a little ball. Smoosh it out until it's the same height as it was. And now I have my 6 biscuits. Now this is going to be saved for my later project, which is dinner. Hoping everyone can fit in here. We'll see. Because I like biscuits when they're baked in a pan. I think it's just kind of nice. They all smush together like a little family. Because I'm weird. Alright, so 6 biscuits in a pan. Pan goes in the oven, 350, about 10 minutes. We'll check them and we'll assess to see where they are. If they're golden brown and poofy, we'll know they're done. If they are not golden brown and poofy, we'll give them a little more time. If they're darker than golden brown and poofy, we're gonna try again. So it ended up taking about 15 minutes rather than 10 because my stove is just not browning like it used to. It's an old stove. Everett and I have been talking about how we need to possibly upgrade our appliances next year, but we're trying to eke out as much life as we can now because it's impossible to find good appliances right now. So we're gonna pull these out. And that's what you end up with. Nice, golden brown, flaky biscuits that you can eat with your dinner. Thanks for stopping by on a snowy evening. I don't know if you have miles to go before you sleep, but I appreciate you coming on over. Until next time, take care of yourselves.